Hey guys, today we're going to show you how to do an oil change on your Toyota with the 3UR FE engine, show you all the parts you need and the easy steps to get it done. These engines take 8.5 quarts of 0W20 motor oil. Go ahead and pick up 10 quarts and one of these funnels to make filling up very easy. You're also going to want a 14mm socket. That's for getting the oil drain plug bolt out. And this 12mm socket's for getting those 5 bolts that hold the skid plate on. You're also going to need an oil filter wrench. This is a 65, 67mm with 14 flutes. You're going to need that to get that oil filter off. And you're going to need a ratchet with an extension. And the extension's for getting the bolts that are holding the skid plate on. And you also need a Phillips head screwdriver. There's 3 screws or bolts that hold the skid plate to part of the plastic on the front. Also get some shop towels to clean up any messes you make. And one of these nice oil drain pans. It's super easy to help you so you don't lose your bolt. You're also going to need a new filter element. You can see here we have an OEM Toyota one. There's a lot of different brands that are a little bit cheaper that you could use as well. Start it up, get the engine warm, just for about a minute or two, and go ahead and pop the hood. You can see here with the skid plate off the location of those 5 bolts. There's 3 towards the back and 2 in the front. There's also these 2 little hooks that hold the skid plate up. So when you get it off, you kind of got to jiggle those around to get it off. And there's also those 3 little screws I mentioned earlier, which I'll show here in a second. But here we are removing some of the bolts. And then now we're getting some of those screws off on the front, those 3 screws. Once you got all those things off, like I said, wiggle it around, you'll be able to get that skid plate off. And once we have the skid plate off, we can go under the vehicle here, and you can see where the oil filter is, that black housing with the silver cover on it. And then if you look a little further back, we can see the oil drain pan right here with the drain pan bolt on it. I always like to make sure I can get the oil filter loosened up before I drain all the oil out. So go ahead and just get that filter wrench and crack that oil filter loose. Then take your ratchet with your 14mm socket and get that drain pan bolt loosened up. Once you get it loose, you can do the rest by hand until it comes out and the oil starts flowing out. You can see here in the video, there is a crush washer or gasket that stayed on the oil pan. That's between the bolt and the pan itself as a seal. It's not mandatory to replace that. I like to replace it every time, but we didn't have one handy, so I wouldn't recommend using it more than 2 or 3 times, maybe at most, before you get a new one. Go ahead and let all the oil drain out. It might take a few minutes, and once it all does drain out, go ahead and put the oil drain pan bolt back in with a new gasket if you have one. If not, like I mentioned, that's okay. And then once you get it tightened up by hand, get your ratchet back out with the 14mm and get it tightened up. Now, you don't need a torque wrench per se to do this. Just give it a good turn with your hand. You don't want to over torque it and strip the threads, but just give it a nice hand turn and you should be good to go. Once you get that drain bolt back in, go ahead and go back to the oil filter, and you can see here we're taking this little silver cap off. And that's so we can access the ability to drain the oil out before taking the filter off. So once you get that little silver cap off with an extension, go ahead and stick that plastic piece that came in the filter box and jam that into the filter. And then like you see here, the oil will pour out and you can drain it out this way. Once it all drains out, go ahead and pull that plastic piece out. You will not need this again. And then make sure you replace that gasket that goes around where that little silver cap is. Once you get that gasket replaced, put that silver cap back on. And you can use your extension. Again, you can use a regular extension piece that you would put into a 3/8 socket. It'll fit right in there, and you can use that as your tightening mechanism like you see here. Once you have that back in, go ahead and take your oil filter wrench and your extension and go ahead and get that oil filter housing out so we can access the actual filter material. There are 2 O-rings you want to replace, one up top here by the threads and one on the bottom underneath that silver thing we took out earlier. I recommend replacing that O-ring gasket before you put the new filter into place. It's easier to get it off and you risk not getting anything onto the new filter material. But you can see here we got the new filter installed. Now we're getting that O-ring off. To use a little screwdriver to kind of pry it around that first lip. Now when you're installing the new gasket, it's important to go ahead and put some oil on it as a lubricant to help it not get brittle as easily and help it slide on easily without getting damaged. You can see here we have the new O-ring on, the new gasket on. Put it right back into that same place you took the other one off. It's not all the way down to the bottom. It's right just below the threads. Now we'll reinstall the filter housing with the new filter material in place. You don't need to use a ratchet to get this super tight. You can usually do it by hand and get a good hand tighten. Then make sure to grab a shop rag and just wipe off any excess oil, clean the area. That way when you're filling the new oil in, you can spot a leak a lot easier. All right, time to put the new oil in. We'll go ahead and put 8.5 quarts in, and then we'll do our starting up of the engine to get it warm just for a few seconds to get the oil flowing around, and then we'll check the dipstick to make sure our level's good. We can always add a little bit more if we need to. However, if you put too much in to begin with, you can't really get it out without having to pull the plug again and drain it, which is a really big mess, and you don't want to do that. So start off with 8.5 and add a little bit if you need to. Don't overfill it to start. Go ahead and get the oil cap reinstalled, and then we'll go ahead and do our test. All right, so let the engine run for about 15 to 30 seconds just to get the oil moving around in through all the parts. And we'll just peek underneath the vehicle to make sure nothing's leaking or dripping out, knowing that we got everything tightened up. Now we'll check our dipstick. You can see the two notches here, the high on the right and the low on the left. We'll clean the dipstick off, and then we'll reinsert it. And when we pull it back out, we want to make sure the oil level is just below that full level. It's kind of hard to see here, but it is right on the right spot. We don't want to overfill it. We don't want to underfill it. And then we'll go ahead and get our skid plate back on the same way we took it off. And we are all done. Hey, thanks everybody for watching. Hopefully you can now take this video and do the oil change yourself. And stay tuned for more videos.